Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to my channel. I'm Jane from When Up My Cloth. I thought today we would do some colourful animals in paint, and I will show you how to do that. Okay, so I have selected, slightly overexposed but hopefully you can see that, a photograph from the internet, a free reference photo of a hare. You want a fairly simple shape with lots of nice contrast really. Hopefully you can just about see that. Okay, leave that out of the way. Okay, so I've drawn a simple pencil drawing and then sticking it to my board. Done a little bit of work with a black pen. Not lots of detail, you can spend as much time as you like getting this just right. I can see I can add a little bit more ink to it in places. Just getting my pen. You do want a permanent ink, so you want something that is going to dry and then allow you to put paint on top. If you use normal fountain pen ink, then unfortunately it's going to run and you're going to end up with a slightly muddy mess. But yeah, so add as much or as little detail as you like with a pen. Here I've kept it fairly light and simple because we'll give it contrast and a bit more interest and colour with the paint. This is a brush pen, again with permanent ink. They're really nice because you can get really fine lines, but also, let me just show you that a bit closer. Also you can use them on the side and get quite nice texture, sort of broken texture, which is good for darker areas. Okay, right, let's think about painting this. Okay, so I've selected some colours. See these in my palette here. You can use any colours you like. The whole point of this is it isn't going to be a realistic animal, so it can be any colours you like. I've got a dark purpley colour, a cool green, a turquoise, a pink, an orange and a yellow, but literally you can use any colours you like. You just really need to think about having something a bit darker, something a bit lighter, something a bit cool and something a bit warm. That's all we need. And here you can see what these colours look like painted out. Any colours you like, it doesn't have to be anything specific. Here's an example that I've done before. A little lion cub, again with this particular palette of colours, which is why I've selected those so you can see what that looks like finished. Okay, so job number one is just literally wet some areas with clean water. You can go a little bit over the edges, you don't need to be neat. Probably best to work on a particular area rather than try and do it all at once, otherwise you'd be completely rushing trying to get everything finished in one go. Okay, so you probably can't really see that because it is literally just clean water, but I've just spread that on and it's gone slightly muddy in places because I've only just put that ink on and it hasn't really had a chance to dry, but you can let yours dry. So this is the area that's been wet, just literally the ears and the top of the head. Okay, so the point of the reference photo is it really allows you to look closely at your reference photo and then see where it's light and where it's dark, and that's really how we give it shape and make it look realistic, even though we're not painting realistic colours, but it will have a sense of form and shape. So that's had a moment or two to settle, so because you want the water to sink into the paper just a little bit, so that when you put the paint on, it doesn't spread everywhere and float on the surface of the water. It's dampened the paper so it moves and you get soft edges, but you are still getting the paint to stay where you want it, but mix nicely on the paper. Okay, so I'm just gonna paint on some of my palest colour where the hair is lightest. You don't need to be too neat. Okay, and then I want some nice hot warm orange because he's quite bright near the base of his ears. I can't see the top of his ears because obviously that photo didn't have that on, so I just made them up, as you do. Okay, right. So he's got pale around the inside of this ear, but it's much, much darker in the middle. So I'm going to use some of my dark green. You see how that is flaring and moving on the paper because the paper underneath is damp. And you're just touching it on the paper, stroking it on, allowing the paint to mix and do its own thing, because that's what's the beauty of watercolour, isn't it, when it does that. Okay, so that's some green. This area I want a little bit of mid-tone, so I'm going to use my turquoise for that. There we are. So that's a little bit lighter than this dark green. Right, and then I want some really, really dark colour, so I use my purpley black. I'm going to put that in the middle there and a little bit on this edge. Okay, so stand back, have a little look at that. What do I think? Not too bad, that'll do for now. I've got a couple of bits up here that are a bit hard, so with just a damp brush, squeeze it out so it's wet, it's damp but not sopping wet. I can just tickle those edges and it just softens them slightly. There we go. Right, so give my brush a really good clean and let's think about his face. Okay, so I'm going to wet all of his face and eyes, again not too neatly. Push it in a bit with a slightly stiff brush, that way that it really allows me to not have to wait too long for it to settle into the paper, because I'm not the most patient of people. It does depend on the weather. If it's a warm day, it will dry and settle in so much more quickly than if it's a cold day. It's reasonably chilly today, so just give that a moment. So I'm looking at my reference photo, which I'll show you again. Okay, so it is a little bit burnt out, but he's quite warm here, he's quite dark on his forehead, and he's got warmer tones around the edges of his nose. So let's give that a go. Okay, so start with my lightest colour, my yellow. Where do I want my lightest colours? So it's a little bit backlit, so right on that edge he's really quite bright, a little bit around that eye. So I'm not cleaning my brush, I'm just going to pick up my orange and then looking at my reference, where do I want those slightly warmer colours? Bit around his nose, a bit more paint. Okay, so where do I want to intensify those warm colours? So I'm using my hot pink for that. You see how it touches the existing paint and just softly mix into it, which creates a nice effect. We're not looking for detailed, we're not looking for realistic. Not too much over there, might have overdone that slightly. So damp brush, just pick up some of that paint because it's probably a bit more than I wanted. Okay, so where is he cool? There's not lots of really cool around the edges of his face, so I use my mid-tone just to add. Actually going to work with the second brush, sometimes I do that, so I don't have to keep cleaning my main brush. I can just use my second brush for softening. So there we go. And that eye is a little bit paler. I'm leaving his eyes just at the moment. Now this area in the middle of his forehead is a combination of mid-tone and dark, so I'm painting it turquoise. Had dried out a bit, but adding that white paint it's dampened it back up again. Okay, so let's pick up some of the dark green. Add a touch of that. You see me dotting that in. Then I pick up the purple, and again I just want to touch that in to just give the impression of the fur and the fact that it's shadowed and it's darker fur. see up here that I need a bit more colour. Okay, this comes down a little bit further. It's quite dark around the edges of his eyes, so I can add a bit of purple there. Not so much on the other side. Okay, so got a bit of depth on his nose and underneath, but it's dried here, so I'm just going to, that brush is dirty, give it a clean, tickle those edges so they soften. Okay. Either stand back or I sort of squint at it to let me see the tones without not too much detail. That can be a good check of whether you've got enough colour on. Don't want loads, I'm just giving this just a little bit more shape with a darker colour and then touch of soften. Okay, I think that'll do. Right, so my main brush, just giving it a good clean, and I'm going to wet his body. Being quite firm with it, really need to sort of push it into the paper a little bit because I'm not hugely patient. Okay, you can hear it scratching on the paper where the brush is pushing the water into the surface of the paper. Right, I'll just let that settle for just a moment. There. Okay, so if I look at my reference photo again, it is very, just about see, it's much warmer and brighter on this side because the light is coming from the right. This side is cooler and darker because he's slightly more in shadow, so that is what I am looking for when I paint his body. So again, I'm starting with my palest colour. He's nice and warm over this side and he's got a sort of a halo of light just on that edge. Just need a little bit more paint, so not really mixing this, I'm just picking these colours straight from my palette because they're not hugely realistic, it doesn't matter exactly what they're like. So letting that warm come over to about halfway. There we go. Right, so I want a little bit more depth, so I'm picking up my pink. We need to define the break between his head and his shoulder, and it's a little bit darker, so I'm using the pink for that. It's a deeper tone than the oranges and the yellows, and just allows me to do that because your eye reads it as darker, and then you can see the break between here on the face and here on the shoulder. Okay. Right, so now I need to clean my brush and then just move to my cooler colours. So that is mainly going to be a base of turquoise. There is just a bit of light on this back here because the light's coming from this side and it's sort of catching the back of his shoulder as well. Excuse me. So I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow there just to indicate that. Got some interesting bright greens here where the yellow is mixing with the turquoise, but I don't mind that. So quite rough, doing it quite quickly, just putting that colour on, and then want some of my nice dark green. It's quite dark under his chin. If I emphasise this area, this will make his face stand out. Okay, got my pictures just gone. There we are, back up again so I can see what I'm doing. Right, a bit more of that nice dark green. Pulling this colour out so it just looks roughly like fur. It's not a detailed painting, it's quite loose, so it does encourage you to work quickly and not spend too time agonising over details. And a little bit more depth under here to help you see that that's underneath his neck. Here, I don't know if you can see, but it's dried and it's a little bit too hard, so my damp brush Just tick all those edges out. There we go. Right. A bit more of my dark purple. And it'll mix on the paper and look fairly soft and fairly fur-like. Just want a tiny bit more depth on the sunny side, so I've mixed a little bit of the orange and the pink just to give me a slightly deeper tone, because obviously this is drying now and the watercolour dries slightly paler when you put it on than when you put it on the paper. It looks brighter when it first goes on, so sometimes you need a little bit of an extra coat. There we are. Not too bad, but I need a bit more purple underneath here, I think. Mixing on the paper because it's damp. There we are. Okay, I think that will do. Just need to do a little bit, give his eyes a little bit of attention. Select a slightly thinner brush. You see that one? Okay, so the rim of his eye is quite orangey, so I'm going to paint that, taking care to think about where the light is. So I need to leave white paper for where there's white gaps. There we are. There's a little bit of a shadow onto his eye. Let's take a touch of that pink as well, because if you use the same colours throughout your painting, it gives it harmony, which always looks nice. Touch of softening. Okay, and I just need a little bit of orange just in front of that eye over there. Okay. Right, that is the basic first layer done. Now I probably would work over this, and as it's dry start to add little bits more paint and just emphasise little details that just need a little touch more pulling into focus with harder edges, and you get the harder edges by painting the paint onto dry paper. It's not damp underneath, so it can't move, so you will get more defined shapes. And see how that looks a little bit more defined now. Probably could do a bit more detail here, but touch of softening. Okay, so I am going to leave it there. Hopefully that was useful. A chance for you to see how quickly I paint when I'm doing loose painting, and to give you a basic example of how to paint colourful animals with pen and wash on top of an ink layer. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks very much.